Good morning and welcome to Valley Views. I'm your host, Glenn Edison. Certainly glad to have you today. As always, we're thankful for the BTC Fiber for sponsoring our program. And you can see this program on BTC Fiber's YouTube page as well as BTC Fiber's Cable Channel 18. And we'd also like to thank our sponsor, Needful Things General Store on Highway 127, just north of the Bethel Church of Christ. You can go by there and find you something you might need, and you might find something you don't need, but you won't anyway. So go by and check them out, and we're certainly glad to have them. But today we have with us Sam Hudson. He's a local attorney here in Dunlap. Sam, it's good to have you. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Mr. Edson. Glad to be here.
And first of all, I'd like to do a little background. I know you went to West Point and got your degree there with the military, with your law degree.
Correct.
And then from there, I guess a lot of people are not familiar with military. You go into a JAG Corps, right? Is that correct?
Right.
And then they just send you wherever they need you, right?
Yeah, basically. So I graduated from West Point, the U.S. Military Academy in 1995, and so I owed the military 5 years of active duty service. And so I during the time I was serving that service, the Army, as well as the other branches of the military, have a program where they take active duty officers and send them to law school. So I didn't get my law degree from West Point. I actually attended the University of Tennessee in Knoxville.
Oh, okay.
And earned my law degree there, and the Army paid for it. And so after that, then I served some additional time in the Army in the JAG Corps.
And most of that time was overseas, correct?
Well, some of it was. I was in Korea. I went to Kuwait for a brief period of time. But as a JAG officer, I was assigned to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, with both the 82nd Airborne Division and the 18th Airborne Corps. And it was then that I went to Kuwait for a little while.
So that kept you pretty busy then, didn't it?
Yeah, it was a very busy Army post there. A lot going on there.
And a lot of people don't realize, of course, I guess they watch NCIS and all that kind of stuff today.
That's right.
But there's a lot more to it. There's a lot of stuff into it.
A lot more to it, and not as much to it. Some of those the JAG officers and investigators there are flying airplanes and doing all kinds of crazy and wild things. Not so much the case, but there's a lot more substance to it as well.
A lot more than just a TV program.
That's correct.
And also, I guess in the military, it's a little different, not really different as far as the law is concerned, but you're dealing with military, and so there's a lot of different things involved with military as opposed to the civilian.
Yeah, that's true. So yeah, the military is governed by, criminal-wise, a uniform code of military justice, and for the most part, it tracks alongside with federal law. One key difference is the charge of AWOL, absent without leave, and that's basically a military unique charge, criminal charge.
Right.
Basically, you get charged for not going to work.
Yeah.
So that doesn't exist in the civilian world for the most part.
Yeah. And I know that gave you a lot of fond memories. You made a lot of friends and everything. I'm sure you still have some of those same friends today.
Yeah, absolutely, sure do.
And of course, that the camaraderie in the military always is a good thing.
Yeah, it is, and a lot of the veterans that leave the military, that's one of the things that they miss the most is the camaraderie. It's really an important part of that.
Right. All right, so let's get into today's topic that's particularly interesting to homeowners and family members of homeowners, and that's estate planning.
Yeah, so estate planning is a very important part of, or should be a very important part of most people's everyday activities. Some people make the mistake that that's something that you don't necessarily need to do until much later in life, but that's not always the case depending on your exact circumstances.
Right, and it also, a lot of it depends on, I guess, the financial situation of the family. I mean, you may have a lot of things to go through, and then you may not have very little. You may have very little things.
That's true, and a lot of people have the misunderstanding or the misconcept that if you do not have a will, that your property will revert or escheat back to the state of Tennessee or the federal government. For the most part, that doesn't happen. So if you don't have any estate planning documents in place at all, when you pass, unless your property is entitled in a joint name with another individual, it'll pass pursuant to what we call the laws of intestate succession. And those laws are set forth in the Tennessee Code that basically pass your property on to your closest of heirs. And the law sets forth some pretty specific guidelines on who those closest heirs are. Of course, your spouse and your children are your closest heirs, and if you don't have any of those, then it sets forth the next in line for that.
Right, and a lot of people don't realize that this, by doing estate planning, it cuts out a lot of grief if you didn't have one.
It sure can. It sure can, and a lot of unintended consequences sometimes. The good thing about estate planning is, to a large degree, you get to determine how your estate, or the assets and sometimes debts that you owe at the time of your life or time of your death, are distributed. In certain instances, if you don't have a last will and testament, I've seen this happen a lot. Perhaps adult children that you, for whatever reason, as a family member or as a parent, have become estranged from them, and it happens more often than you would think. If you do not have a will that sets forth how you want your property to be distributed, let's say you die a single person with 3 children, and only one of them has really had any interaction with you or been a part of your life for the last 20 years. Well, if you don't have a last will and testament, all 3 of your children will share equally in the estate, and a lot of times that causes a lot of heartache and consternation among family members when a person's estate has to get distributed, at least in part, to people that really have had no involvement with the individual, or in some cases have had very bad relationship with that individual.
So really, because that puts it in the hands of the state and to divide it if you didn't have some kind of a will or something.
That's right. The laws of Tennessee dictate who receives your property. It's almost always going to be a family member of some degree, but a lot of times I've seen that's exactly the last person an individual might want their property to go to, for any number of reasons.
Right. And it's always, as you mentioned, some people wait till late in life, but in life we're never assured of the next day, so it might be best to get it done as soon as you can, and you can always amend it.
And that's true. So the purpose of estate planning is to ensure that, as we said, your property is distributed the way you want it to be distributed upon your passing. Most young people in their early 20s may not have much. If they're like probably 90% of young couples, they have way more debt than they have assets. And so a lot of times there's not much to distribute in an early death like that, outside some pretty exigent circumstances. But the more you advance in life and the more you accumulate wealth and assets, the more important it tends to become to have those estate planning tools in place.
Right, and you mentioned debts. I know in some of my own family's cases where there was outstanding debts, and that had to be taken care of.
That's right.
And so you may think, well, hey, I'm getting all this stuff, and next thing you know, you go, well, I've got to sell this to pay this debt.
That's true. So for the most part, a person's debts when they pass must be satisfied out of the funds or the assets that they owned at the time of their death. And there's ways to get around some of those debts, credit card debts being the most, in my experience, the easiest to get around, and I won't go into all the details of that, but if you probate a person's estate, a credit card company normally will not pursue the debt against that person's estate, at least in my experience. Medical bills, hospital bills, other judgment creditors, not always the case. They may or may not come after the assets of the estate to try to satisfy those debts.
Right, so that's why it's always important to get all that squared away.
True, and there's a lot of different ways to do that.
Well, and like you said, it prevents a lot of headaches.
On so many different levels.
Yeah, I mean, it prevents family members from really getting into fights, basically. And I don't necessarily mean physical fights, but I'm sure there has been physical fights.
That would probably be one of the most important reasons that I can think of to have at least a will in place, because for whatever reason, I've seen families, siblings who for years, at least on the surface, seem to get along just fine. But I don't know what it is, if it's the stress or the vacuum created by a patriarch or matriarch dying and leaving the siblings to their own devices, that sometimes there seems to be problems between those siblings. And if, say, mom passed and she promised one of the siblings the dining room set or the china
Yeah.
set, and the other sibling says, no, she promised me that, and they can
Yeah.
get in an argument there, or perhaps one sibling feels like they provided more financial support or love and support of that parent through their lives, and without any documentation to reflect that, maybe in a will, to say
Right.
this parent wants this child to receive more of a share of their estate, it gets equally distributed between the siblings, and that can cause a lot of arguing sometimes.
And I know a lot of times, as you pointed out, a lot of times families think everything should be divided equally, but like you said, there might be maybe one of the siblings who's done better, well off. They're more well off and have done better, and maybe there's a sibling that's not as well off, and maybe the parent says, well, hey, we're going to help them because they need more.
That's right.
And they're not as much need as the other. So, and then that gets into conflicts too.
That's right. And absent a will that sets forth that's parent's intention, then the law doesn't take into consideration those things that you just mentioned.
Right. So doing this really sets the the scale for everybody.
It does, and it can, like you said, potentially avoid a lot of heartache and headaches.
Yeah, and then if they don't like it once it's been done, it's too bad, because they're not going to be able to do anything about it.
Yeah, in most cases, the law, at least in what we call intestate succession, is pretty black and white, and there are reasons for that, and that's to avoid all these close calls and special circumstances that you find in every family.
Right. And the state's not going to get into all that. They're just
not for the most part.
And of course, I guess people have the opportunity that they could go to court over all this stuff, but that's kind of where you don't want to go.
Well, if you can avoid it, it's usually in everyone's benefit to avoid the cost of that, because litigation and the cost of a contentious probate of an estate can be quite expensive, and really, in the long run, reduce the available assets that are available to distribute to the heirs.
I know a family years ago that the family was a poor family, and the man had built his own house, and it wasn't it's just a standard house. It wasn't valuable, and I think the family, it was going to be left to one of the siblings, and the other three siblings didn't like it, so they went to court because they wanted their money, because they thought they could sell the house. And I think the house was when it got evaluated, it was like $35,000. It wasn't a lot, and then those children had to pay the one they were suing. They had to pay their court costs. So in the end, they did not win.
Certainly an unintended consequence there.
Yeah,
Right.
And they thought they were going to get a lot of money, and it just wasn't there.
Yeah. When family members or siblings or anyone like that are fighting, it can, like I said, reduce or sometimes completely eliminate those assets, so that everyone leaves empty-handed.
Right, and but anyway, that's one of those cases where they fought and then they didn't get what they thought they were going to get.
Right.
So I guess it's better just to try to get along.
If possible, that's always the preferred way to go.
Because I'm sure you hate to be in the middle of something if you had to be the lawyer in that case.
Yeah, it can be stressful and contentious at times. Of course, that's part of our job and what we take on. But a uncontested, smooth probate of an estate is always preferred to one where everyone's arguing, fighting, or contesting everything.
Now, do you have to have a special training to do this type? I mean, is there classes you have to go to get certified in this, or can any attorney just do this?
Any attorney can do it. So basically, when you're licensed in the state of Tennessee, you are thereby qualified, at least under the law, to handle estate planning and the probate of estates. Now, there are certain, I guess, specialty designations you can earn if you receive enough training that will perhaps qualify you or designate you as a certified estate planner or some type of special training in that, but it's not required.
And so that would be extra training you'd have to go through to get that certification. Right?
That's correct, but certainly not required.
That's something you don't want to do right off the bat.
Probably be pretty expensive to do right out of law school.
I'm sure it would be.
Sure.
I'm sure it would be. And I know you had a good time. Of course, you're a former student here. Had you in 7th grade, I think it was. And I like to look back at my students and see how they've done over the years. And then I keep meeting students, from time to time that I haven't seen in years. I saw one yesterday, and he come up and he goes, "You remember me?" And I said, "What's your?" I remember face. Face is a lot. I forget names.
Yeah.
And he told me. I said, "Oh, okay." And so I enjoy seeing my students and see how well they've done in life.
I can imagine that's probably one of the most valuable benefits of being an educator. And a lot of times our public education in Sequatchie County and in surrounding counties, probably everywhere across the U.S., are easy targets for just not doing their job or whatever the criticism of the day wants to be. But I've obviously a product of public education. You're one of my educators. Looking back at some of the best teachers that molded and shaped and a lot of times disciplined me. And it was, I think a public education is only as valuable as what you put into it. And so we in Sequatchie County have certainly been blessed with some just wonderful educators and teachers and administrators through the years.
Well, and in that, I've looked, when I was teaching, I would look back at scores and everything, and really Sequatchie County schools, when you compare them to like Hamilton County and some of the bigger school systems, they were either at or above in some cases in some of the areas. So we have a good school system.
Yeah, we do. And like I said, it's easy to sit back and criticize sometimes, but again, you put enough effort and time and energy into your education here in Sequatchie County, and you're going to come out okay.
Well, and we have not only you, but Thomas Austin is a product of the school system. He was a lawyer, or he is a lawyer.
Right. Jennifer Mitchell, his sister, is.
Right.
Elizabeth Adams, who was Elizabeth Greer.
Right.
She, and of course, her father was as well. Tommy Austin was. So, yeah.
I mean, we have a lot of people that have done well in life. Then we have those who've gone into other professions that have done well.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
So, we do have a good school system here and a good sound one.
Yeah, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention my longtime paralegal, Sarah Hayes. She's now an attorney.
Yes.
She's a product of Sequatchie County school system. So
and I was tickled to
her
hear
as
that.
well.
I was tickled to hear that. Yeah. And she's gone hard at nights and up there and at the Nashville School of Law.
Yeah,
right?
she really did a lot of work over 4 years, working full time and raising 2 small children and doing that. A lot of dedication.
Yeah. Oh, I know that had to be hard.
Yeah, I'm sure it was.
I mean, I didn't like it when I was teaching school and having to go to school.
Exactly.
But I imagine law school is a step above. It's a little bit more intense.
Yeah, it actually is. But it's definitely a difficult and arduous task for sure.
Well, and someone like yourself who is a lawyer, I want you to be on the knowledge. Right. I want you up there. I want you to know what you're doing.
Sure.
I don't want to go to court and you not know, and then I go, oh man, I just lost. Something.
Absolutely.
And not that you have to win every case, because I'm sure that's not always the case, but I want you to know. I want my attorney to know what they're doing.
Right, of course.
And I mean, there may be other things that cause you not to win. It's not out of your, cause of you. But,
right.
But you have a good record. So.
Yeah, well, you just try to be prepared as much as possible, and you
Yeah.
can always change the facts of the case, but just do your best.
Well, and I think a lot of people don't understand that. I think maybe they have this idea that lawyers just show up for the courts, and but there's a lot of going back and studying the law. I mean, I know you've got your law books there in your office, and you have to go back and see just exactly what the law states.
Yeah, that's correct. The law is a lot of times a mixture of facts and law that you kind of have to apply the facts to the law and vice versa, and try to come out with the best decisions you can. So hopefully your attorney's not showing up at court having not done any of that before your case starts.
Yeah, I keep hearing. Of course, this is an attorney out of Chattanooga, but I keep hearing his ad that talks about times have changed when he just showed up with a legal pad and notes. There's a lot to it now.
Yeah, those are before my time.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, and so there's so much to an attorney now. I mean, when the case they were given is like 911 calls and traffic cams and all kind of stuff that goes into that, and that takes time, and you have to ask for those things, and it takes time to get all that together.
Oh yeah, in the 15 years that I've been practicing, I've seen that maybe used to start out when I first started practicing, you would have relatively small case files, but with the proliferation of social media and everything video recorded and text messages that we can access, just the available amount of discovery materials has blossomed, and nowadays it's a bigger case will be 4 or 5 banker boxes full of information instead of just one expandable file. So yeah, the proliferation of information and available media and other sources out there has definitely created additional work in that regard.
Right, and social media has probably changed a lot of what you do.
Oh yeah, it has. Especially with divorce cases, that seems to be the one that is most broadly broadcast on social media. But there was a time where I wouldn't have to meet with my clients necessarily. I could just look on their Facebook or social media page to see what was going on in their divorce. So it's definitely a tool that's used by attorneys.
Well, and that's why I tell even young people. I say, be careful what you text and what you put on social media, because it can be used against you.
It really can. It can be used for you as much as it can be against you. And a lot of times we deal with clients in court where they're having to explain things that they posted on social media, sometimes in a fit of rage or just let their emotions get the best of them. And it seemed reasonable at the time, but when you're sitting there in court where you're being scrutinized by a judge, it's oftentimes a lot of it's hard sometimes to justify those postings.
Right. And also, speaking of judges are human too. I mean, the times I've been in other court cases from times past, the judge, he could have been a hard nose against the people I was going against, but he was more, he tried to keep everything in perspective. Yeah,
judges are definitely human, but the good judges do that. They have a way of trying to come out with the best outcome by having an objective perspective over things, and some things that our clients may get really upset or be fired up about, the judge may not pay as much attention to some of those things as they think they should. But our judges do, I think, overall a really good job of cutting through the emotions and trying to come out with a good outcome.
And they also work with y'all as attorneys too.
A lot of them do. So our circuit court judges are full-time judges, and so they don't practice law anymore. And our chancellor is also a full-time judge. But our general sessions judges, especially in Bledsoe with Howard Upchurch and here in Sequatchie with Tommy Austin, they also practice law because they're considered part-time judges.
Well, that I didn't realize.
Yep.
But I guess I should, because I knew they practiced. So
That's right.
I guess I should assume that, And so you've been here, 15 years you said?
Yeah, this is my 15th year actually. In May will be the 15th year that I opened my office. Opened it in May of 2008.
It's been right here all the time.
Yeah, it sure has.
And that's neat. And right here downtown Dunlap. Well, that's where all of our attorneys are.
Yeah,
downtown
for the most
Dunlap.
part, sure are.
And well, that's good. And is there anything maybe we need to point out we haven't brought out?
Yeah, just to kind of wrap it up with estate planning, it generally consists of more than necessarily a last will and testament. A last will and testament is very important, but other things you should consider are powers of attorney. One would be a general power of attorney, and that's a document in which you appoint someone else to act on your behalf. And generally that applies when you get to a stage in life, if you ever get there, where you're unable to make good decisions on your own. That
Right.
could be either early onset of dementia, maybe a head injury from a car accident, temporary illness, things of those natures. It's important to have someone designated ahead of that event, if it ever occurs, to step in and be able to make decisions for you. Otherwise, you're left with petitioning the court,
Right.
and that can be expensive and sometimes lengthy. Another document is a healthcare power of attorney. That's very similar to the general power of attorney, except that it appoints another individual to make healthcare related decisions for you if you're unable to. And then another document that we use a lot is called a living will, and that's an expression of your desire while you're still able and healthy, that if you ever get to a point in life where artificial life support is the only thing keeping you alive, and in the opinion of your medical doctor, if you're removed from that, you'll either die or remain in what we call a persistent vegetative state,
Right.
sometimes referred to as vegetable. Then that's your expression that you want to be removed from artificial life support, not prolonged unnecessarily. That document really became popular after a case that made it to the Supreme Court. I believe it was in the 90s. Terry Chavo, her family
Yes, I
appealed
remember that.
her case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And so those are some basic estate planning documents. And then I'll say one more thing and wrap it up. Also, a very valuable tool in estate planning is trust. Trust allow you, for the most part, to avoid the whole process of probate. And when I was growing up, at least, if you heard the term trust, you thought of very wealthy and very powerful people. But through the years, especially in the last decade, maybe longer, a trust has become a vehicle that what we call common people use, everyday people use to protect their assets either from debts while they're living, or to avoid possible probate when they passed. And so a trust can be a very, very important and useful tool in estate planning as well. And so there's a lot of reasons to go with one over the other, or a combination of both that we probably won't have time to get into today. But it's certainly important to, if you're thinking about estate planning, to go and consult with one of the attorneys here in town or somewhere nearby, and try to get those questions answered, so that you can come up with the best plan possible.
Well, and all these things we mentioned, most folks, they don't look forward to doing these things, but really it's a key and essential for everybody that they need to get that done, because it's just like in funeral planning. If you don't get that done, when it comes time for the funeral planning, you may do or not do something that the person you're burying wanted to do or not do.
That's exactly right. That's a very good point. So many of the clients that come into my office say, "Oh, we've been putting this off for so long," and then after it's done, they're really relieved to have done that and got it off their shoulders, so to speak. And you pointed out earlier, a will. A will can be modified or revised as many times as you want to throughout your life. I always tell my clients, you can change this until you can't change it.
Yeah.
And when you can't change it is when you pass, or if you get to that point in life where you can't make competent decisions anymore.
Right, because it could be either a spouse or a child that passes away and they wouldn't be in there any longer.
Yeah.
And little things like that.
Or a divorced spouse that you
yeah.
don't want in your will anymore. That would
Right.
be a real big reason to modify some
Right.
estate planning documents.
So, and just always treat your parents well, right?
The Bible says so, and
Yeah.
so does my experience in life. You better treat your parents well, for sure.
Yeah. Well, listen, I certainly appreciate you being with us today, Sam, and I appreciate this, because I'm sure this once this goes on air, I'm sure people will listen to it.
Well, thanks for having me. I've enjoyed it.
Because I've been wanting to do this for a long time, but of course your schedule, you're busy and you stay busy.
Yeah, we're all busy people, I guess.
But that's all right. It keeps you out of trouble, right?
That's right, for the most part.
Yeah. But I certainly appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you, Mr. Edson. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you. And again, you can always see this program on BTC Fiber's YouTube page, as well as BTC Fiber's cable channel 18. And again, we want to thank our sponsor, Needful Things General Store on Highway 127. So until next time, have a great day. Hey everybody, this is Glenn Edison from Valley Views. We appreciate you watching our shows, and we would like for you to like, share, and follow us on Facebook, as well as like and subscribe to our YouTube page.